What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to another video. I am returned to the UK, as you can tell by the fact that I'm wearing a few more layers than it was a couple of weeks ago when I was in Melbourne. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video on the biggest gym mistakes, the biggest training mistakes that I made in my 20s that I have now learned from being in my mid-30s. And today, a slight kind of spin-off from that because I thought it was a generally kind of interesting topic. We are going to come at the same topic, but in regards to nutrition. So prepare to learn the biggest nutrition-related mistakes that I made whilst I was in my 20s that I would 100% encourage you guys to buy the shortcut of and not necessarily make now. Couple of big tips for you. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so getting straight into it then, the first thing that I used to do in my 20s pretty much every flipping day that I now look back on with shame and disgust is start the day straight off the bat with something high carb based, especially high sugar based. Sugary cereals are probably the quintessentially perfect example of that. Now granted, there is a huge amount of kind of biological individuality and variability in terms of how we handle carbs generally and how we handle sugars generally. But I think the vast majority of the world could benefit from making sure that everything is kind of regulated at a baseline first, instead of just getting straight out of bed, having something that's high sugar on an empty stomach and then sending yourself onto like this flipping blood sugar roller coaster for the rest of the day that you're never gonna get off. If you're spending pretty much all of the day either completely starving or completely stuffed, and you never really feel that kind of that healthy middle ground of just appropriately satiated, one of the reasons might be is that you're starting your day with a super high carb, possibly super high sugar meal. And as soon as you get on that blood sugar roller coaster, my opinion on this anyway, is that it's gonna be very, very, very flipping hard to regulate over the course of the rest of the day. As soon as you're on that up and down, it's very unlikely to get to kind of a middle ground at any point in that day. A slightly better approach in my opinion, and this is definitely what I do now, is to break my fast. First thing I have in the day is a high protein, high fat feed. A lot of people might go for the common kind of bacon, eggs, and a little bit of avocado. For me, I'm not a huge fan of pork, so I kind of err on the side of eggs, a little bit of avocado, maybe a couple of mixed vegetables, and some ground beef. There's a reason I'm starting with that first tip, guys, in terms of the biggest nutrition mistakes I've made in my 20s. I think so many people do this, and it basically means that any feedback you're getting from your body, in terms of that biofeedback of, am I hungry? Am I full? How am I actually feeling? Digestively, stomach-wise, energetically, anything. You don't really know if the signals that you're getting are actually right because the blood sugar roller coaster throws everything so far out of whack that it's going to be very hard to discern whether what you're feeling is actually something you should act on or just as a result of the fact that you're on this blood sugar roller coaster. Biggest mistakes in nutrition I made in my 20s, high carb, high sugar breakfast. I implore all of you to flipping stop it and replace it with something that is high protein, high fat, low carb. I think there are very few people in the world who will be detrimentally affected by having less sugar the second they get out of bed. Tip number one done, on to number two. Tip number two, guys, if you have followed any of my content in the past, especially anything nutrition related, you will be aware, because I flip and gob off about it all the time, that I do in fact intermittent fast. I'm not 100% zealot with it, but I would say probably about 95% of the time I do this. So linking that in with my second tip of the day, in terms of the second big thing that I made a mistake with in my 20s in regards to nutrition, is I used to eat every 2 to 3 hours. This is the way that I've always kind of described it, and this is my go-to kind of elevator pitch on intermittent fasting, right? Your body has a fairly comprehensive to-do list of things it needs to be cracking on with. In terms of people who train, which I imagine you do, otherwise you wouldn't necessarily be watching this video, repair damaged muscle tissue, drive other adaptations from the gym, fight off an infection, kill some cancerous cells, produce and release the right hormones for the particular state that we're in at the moment. You see what I mean? So there's 1,000,001 things that our body needs to do. It's an incredibly complicated ecosystem. And as soon as you eat, digest food gets shunted fairly flipping high on that to-do list, which means maybe the other stuff still gets done, but either not as effectively, not as efficiently, kind of gets pushed to the back burner, and it might not necessarily get enough attention. This is the theory behind the benefit of operating in what's called a fasted state, that your body can crack on with all of that other stuff that it needs to do to make sure that we stay nice and fit and healthy, because it isn't always having to go through the process of digesting food. And I've kind of got another theory that I have alluded to in the past, which is the theory that if basically you're actually eating too much, you might be compromising the amount of muscle tissue that you can put on, because repairing damaged muscle tissue is in fact a physiological process that is going to require a hell of a lot of energy from the body. But if you're literally filling it with 6,000 calories a day and eating every 2 to 3 hours, it's focusing on its primary task, which is to digest that food, which means that it might not be able to apply the time and effort that it needs to go into actually making your muscles grow. Your body is unbelievably robust and unbelievably resilient, but it is fallible. There is a finite amount of time and effort and energy that it can put in to each of the tasks that it needs to do. Which is why now I don't tend to eat until about 12:30, 1 p.m. and I tend to stop eating around 8:30 or 9 p.m. I have lost no muscle, no strength from this over the last probably 3 years that I've been doing it, but my digestion is significantly better. I feel much more energetically regulated. My hunger cravings are just, they're 100% used to this now. You're not starving at 8 a.m. when you normally eat at 12. Your body does adapt to this stuff very quickly. And there is nowhere near as much brain fog. In terms of cognition and mental acuity, that has been 10x'd since I intermittent fast. So that is nutrition mistake number 2, guys, that I made whilst I was in my 20s, eating every 2 to 3 hours and never allowing my body to enter into a properly fasted state where I could basically get on with all the stuff that it needs to do to actually keep me healthy and make sure that I live longer and recover properly, and also make sure that my brain can work well. Please learn from this mistake and give intermittent fasting a go. So moving into the back half now, guys, tip number 3, and my third biggest continuous cock up of nutrition in my 20s, was the absolute flipping absence of putting any effort in to try and find information about my own biology and what I personally responded well to. Basically, I never tried to get any individualized data on what might be optimal for me as an individual. I talk a lot on this channel, especially in the early days, about trying to find information that allows us to optimize for our own individual biology. And I think this is much more relevant to nutrition than it is for strength. As an example, if someone is doing 5-3-1 on a powerlifting program, whoever they are around the world is probably going to get stronger. If someone's doing German volume training, doing 10x10, whoever they are, the chances are they're going to put on some decent lean muscle mass. The way that we respond to certain training stimulus, there is individuality in it and variability in it, but overall, it's fairly globally universal. If you start running 5Ks, you're going to get better at 5K, not necessarily have your bench press PB go up. Nutrition, however, is a completely flipping different kettle of fish. And someone might have a particular dietary approach that is absolutely optimal for them. They perform better, they look better, they feel better, they sleep better, everything. And someone else might follow the exact same protocol and not have that at all. But in the mainstream world of like functional and recreational bodybuilding or sports performance improvement, anything to do with performance, physique or health, most of the information that we get in terms of reading articles online or magazines or YouTube videos or whatever will probably give a generalized approach for nutrition. Eat chicken and rice for this, eat this for this, blah, 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 blah. But the fact of the matter is, there is so much variability in the way that nutrition may either optimize us and make us healthier and better and clearer thinkers and faster and stronger, etc., or do completely the opposite and be damaging. As an example, I am extremely gluten intolerant, but I ate gluten up until I was the age of 31. I'm 34 now. And for me personally, I used to think that after eating pretty much anything, feeling very bloated and completely flipping tired was just standard. I genuinely used to think that just needing a nap and looking like a whale was part and parcel of eating food. I used to think that being either completely starving or completely stuffed was also just part and parcel of being kind of a young male athlete. It's only since I've gotten older that I've started to look into things like getting an epigenetic profile from companies like DNA Fit, where you can do like a saliva swab, and based on your genetic makeup, which one of the benefits of that is it doesn't change, you get kind of a data pack given to you, like you'll respond to endurance training this way or power training this way, or high predisposition to being celiac. You're not very good at absorbing antioxidants, so you need to take more of them, or whatever it may be. Stuff like that, that information, even though this is a young science and it might not be 100% accurate, the chances are you accept that information wholesale and know that it might not be completely perfect. It's still going to be beneficial to know. Gaining data on yourself when it comes to nutrition and realizing that no generalized approach will work, and you might be optimal eating broccoli, or broccoli might flipping rot your insides. These things are super important to know. So an epigenetic profile from something like DNA Fit, very helpful. Food intolerance testing, again, another incredibly young science, but definitely worth doing. It might give you some clarity on why you don't necessarily react with certain good foods. And also just taking a flipping deep dive into your own subjective experience with it. How do I feel when I eat this food? Everyone says asparagus is really healthy, but when I eat it, I feel bloated, I feel tired, and I feel a little bit sick, and it doesn't taste particularly good in my mouth. Stop eating it. The chances are it doesn't work very well for you. So epigenetic profiling, food intolerance testing, and the last one would be looking into what you think would be the optimal macro breakdown for you. Luckily, DNA Fit testing does kind of give you this information. But in terms of the ideal protein, carb, and fat ratio, there is huge amounts of variability in this per person. For me, I'm quite low carb generally, but every time I talk about it, I say, this is what works for me. I'm not necessarily prescribing that onto anyone else. Other people, if your ancestry is from Central Africa, the chances are you work pretty flipping well on high carb. But if you are genetically, ancestrally 98% Inuit, and you've got 50,000 generations worth of parents, grandparents, all the way up being Eskimo, the chances are you're not going to do very well high carb because you've been eating walrus blubber for 50 million years. So ancestry is kind of a good indicator, but also again, just look at what works for you and look at what foods make you feel good. If there's a food that always makes you feel tired and or bloated directly after you eat it, maybe stop eating it. If there's something that you eat where you're like, oh, I just feel completely normal and appropriately satiated, completely flat stomach, no bloating or anything, maybe that's good for you. So putting a little bit more effort into both getting tests and looking at your own subjective experience to get some individualized information on what is required for you to be optimal, as opposed to just taking kind of generalized prescriptions, is something that I didn't do until I was 31, but I absolutely encourage everyone that's listening to this to crack on with it regardless of what age you are. And my fourth and final nutrition tip of the day is something I've kind of alluded to already, but I'll go into a little bit more detail with, and that's the fact that overall I was just generally overeating. I kind of spoke about it a minute ago in terms of feeling generally satiated. So basically I say this, now with my blood sugar a lot more under control and the fact that I intermittent fast, etc., I eat when I'm hungry. I have a general set routine, so I break my fast with a big kind of 1,500 to 2,000 calorie meal, and then in the afternoon I usually have a snack like a protein shake, some fruit and nuts, and then in the evening it will be the same, kind of another 1,500 calorie meal. But beyond that, in terms of any kind of intuitive eating, now I basically eat when I'm hungry. Whereas back in my 20s, I used to eat when I wasn't full. And that might sound like the same thing, but it's really not. I used to be at the stage where pretty much all day I could eat if I wanted to, but I don't because I'm just appropriately satiated, and a lot of the time I wait until I feel hungry. Those cravings and hunger drives come at certain times because I'm fairly strict on my schedule, but if I'm a little bit hungrier, as an example, and the drive's a little bit stronger, then I'll eat a little bit more. Whereas back then I still had a schedule, but effectively I was kind of force feeding for about 10 years. And one of the interesting side effects of that is I considered myself like a health guy because I trained a lot. The food that I ate was kind of generally healthy, but I was probably more ambiently tired and had more ambient lethargy than some of my friends that didn't even work out and didn't particularly eat very well. And I do think that the primary reason for that was basically being in a chronic state of being chronically overfed. Fasting for me has been an amazing way to get my blood sugar under control so that when I feel hungry, I know that it is because I'm hungry. And when I feel full, I can kind of respond to it more. As opposed to just being addicted to sugar, needing something, feeling inevitably quite lethargic afterwards, just waiting until the stomach had digested something before I could just force feed again. How's my performance and my physique compared now to when it was back then? I genuinely believe at 34, I'm in better physical shape in terms of muscle mass to body fat. I'm leaner and more proportioned. Total strength wise, I'm probably not as strong, but I don't know, probably over 20 pounds lighter than I was when I was like 26. But when my engine is definitely better, so I've got a much better balance of kind of like strength work and conditioning, and energetically and cognitively, it is so much better than it was then. I was a Royal Marines commando, having served in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was a full-time international athlete. And now, nearly 10 years on at 34, I genuinely believe that my performance, health and physique are better than they were when I was in my mid-20s. And one of the primary reasons for that are these tiny dietary hacks. So there we go, guys. Hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please do smash that like button. Again, it only takes you 2 seconds, but it's incredibly helpful for me to really make sure that the YouTube algorithm knows to drive us and push us to more people. If you've got any questions at all on anything I've covered, please do put it down in the comment section below. If you have not yet done so, please do subscribe. Lots of information and entertainment on all things functional bodybuilding, military prep, hybrid training, bit of biohacking, recovery and longevity stuff, all such like. And as always, beautiful people, stay strong, stay healthy, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next video.